There is a second typewriter behind the Ummo letters, and nobody has ever explained who was sitting at it. 1,000 anonymous pages went out from Spain and France over 30 years, all claiming to come from a world 14 light-years away, and almost every one of them was struck on a single machine. But a handful came off another, with a smaller typeface and the opposite punctuation habits, and the two never mixed. One of those typists eventually got a name. The other never did. And the letters kept arriving after the only confessed author was struck down by a brain hemorrhage. January the 16th, 1966. A Madrid telegraph clerk named Fernando Sesma Manzano opens his mail and pulls out something that is not a crank note. It is a document, typed, paginated, more than 100 pages of careful bureaucratic Spanish, signed with a code DEI 98. Sesma ran a small club of space enthusiasts in the basement of a bar called La Ballena Alegre, the Happy Whale, where a few dozen regulars argued about flying saucers over coffee. The writer explains himself with unnerving calm. He belongs, he says, to a people from a planet they call Ummo, orbiting the star we catalog as Wolf 424, out in Virgo. In 1934 their instruments picked up a radio transmission out of Norway. They followed it home. A landing party set down on the 28th of March, 1950, in the French Alps, near a village called La Javie. And since then, he writes, they have been living here. And that is the part that makes the whole thing hold together. There are only a handful of them, the letters insist, scattered across a few countries, working ordinary jobs, riding the metro, filing paperwork. They ask for nothing. They sell nothing. They tell their readers, over and over, not to believe them. They will never hand over proof anybody could verify, because proof would interfere with our development. A hoaxer normally begs to be believed. This one keeps telling you to doubt it. Every authenticated document carries the same mark, stamped or inked by hand, 2 curved brackets closed around a vertical bar. It looks like the old astronomical symbol for Uranus. The pages arrive with corrections in the margins, consistent numbering, cross-references back to earlier reports. Whoever produced this kept an archive. And the voice never slips, 30 years of correspondence in the same flat, patient, faintly condescending tone, like a field researcher writing up notes on an interesting species.
Now picture where this is landing. Madrid, 1966. Franco still in power, the press still censored, foreign books still stopped at the border. And into that city arrives, by ordinary post, a growing stack of typescript on human sexuality, the failure of political systems, the machinery of religion, the shape of the universe. About 1,000 pages are known today, spread across roughly 150 separate mailings. Not one of them ever asked for a single peseta. The content splits in a way researchers later mapped out. Around 300 pages are social observation, how we raise children, how we treat the sick, what we do to each other at work. Another large block is philosophy and metaphysics. And then there is a hard core, well over 100 pages of raw technical material, biology, gravity, propulsion, the geometry of space, written out with units and equations that took specialists years just to parse. And here is where it gets stranger. It does not stay with Sesma. The mailing list grows, a police officer, an employee at the American Embassy in Madrid, engineers, doctors, a Barcelona businessman named Rafael Farias, the ufologist Antonio Ribera. Then it crosses the border. In France, the researchers Anne Michel and René Fouer start receiving their own packages, microfilm, photographs, documents in fluent French. Whoever this is, they are now running a 2-country distribution operation, by hand. The letters answer back. Someone raises a question at the Happy Whale on a Wednesday, and a typed reply to that exact question lands in somebody's flat the following week. There are phone calls, too, a voice, oddly accented, ringing Sesma and referring to things he had only said in private. Whoever this correspondent was, they were sitting close enough to that little Madrid club to hear the coffee cups. That proximity was the first clue. Almost nobody treated it as one. 3 weeks after that first document reached Sesma, the 6th of February, 1966, an engineer named José Luis Jordan Pena told the newspapers he had watched something land at a lush, on the edge of Madrid. A large disc, standing on 3 legs. And underneath it, he said, a symbol, a bar held between 2 curved brackets. Hold on to that name. He is going to matter more than anybody else in this story, and not in the way you would expect. Then comes the moment that turned a mailing list into a legend. In the spring of 1967, letters go out to Sesma and 2 other correspondents announcing, days in advance, that ships will arrive on the 1st of June, coordinates attached. Between 30 and 40 members of the club later stated they had seen that announcement before the date. A prophecy with a hard deadline and a map reference is a very dangerous thing to put in writing.
On the evening of the 1st of June, 1967, people at San José de Valderas, on the southwest edge of Madrid, look up and see a disc over the suburb. Within weeks, photographs surface, 7 of them, showing the craft with that same symbol clean and legible on its hull. They are credited to a photographer calling himself Antonio Pardo. Investigators went looking for Antonio Pardo for decades. Nobody has ever found him.
Then came the physical evidence. Near the site, buried tubes were recovered, nickel, sealed, unusually pure. Inside them, strips of green plastic embossed with the Ummo emblem. And here is where it gets really interesting, the nickel is terrestrial. The plastic was identified as Tedlar, a film manufactured by DuPont and used in aerospace work. Whatever somebody buried in that Madrid field was made on this planet, by a company you can look up in a catalog.
Ribera and Farias wrote it all up in a book called Un Caso Perfecto, a perfect case, and Ummo became the most heavily documented UFO file in Europe. Then the photographs failed. An American analysis group concluded the object was small and held close to the lens, essentially a plate about 8 inches across, with the symbol inked onto it. A model. Photographed by a man who, as far as anyone can prove, does not exist. That should have finished it. It did not. The letters keep coming through the 70s, go quiet, then start again in the 80s and run into the mid-90s, in Spanish, in French, always the same register, always the same stamp. No book deal. No lecture tour. No collection plate. 30 years of unpaid, anonymous, obsessive typing. Which brings us to the pages themselves, and to the one thing the author could not disguise.
Because a typewriter is a fingerprint. Every machine carries its own wear, a slug that strikes low, a letter that prints heavy, a ribbon that fades along one particular pass. So researchers went back through the entire Ummo corpus, not for what it said, but for how it was struck. And a detailed study of the typing, published in 2022, found something the letters had never accounted for. There was not one machine behind them. There were at least 2. Machine A does most of the work. Ordinary-sized typeface. And on its keyboard sits a Spanish N, the key you get on a machine sold in Spain and, in that era, essentially nowhere else. Its operator has one fixed habit, after a closing question mark, never a full stop, and always an extra space before the next word. Page after page, year after year, the same tiny tick. That is not a species. That is a person. Machine B shows up on only a handful of documents. Smaller typeface. And its operator does the exact opposite, always a full stop after the question mark, never that extra space. One of those pages was typed landscape across the sheet, which points at professional office equipment, not a portable on a kitchen table. 2 machines. 2 sets of habits. And they never once mixed. Somebody was composing this, and somebody else was typing it. And the astronomy carries a fingerprint too. That very first letter gives a precise distance to Wolf 424, 3.685 light-years, as of January 1955. Where does a number like that come from? In 1938, the popular press announced that Wolf 424 might be the Sun's nearest neighbor, at about 3.7 light-years. Astronomers later corrected it to roughly 14.6, and that correction stayed buried in the journals. The letters knew the magazine version, not the correction. Later letters reframed the gap as a shortcut through folded space. In 1993, a Spanish skeptics magazine ran an article titled Ummo, Another Myth That Crashes. The author was José Luis Jordan Pena, the same man who saw the disc at a Lush in 1966. A psychologist, a telecommunications technician, once vice president of the Spanish Parapsychology Society. He said he had built Ummo as a psychosociological experiment on human credulity, and that the journalist Javier Sierra had pushed him into coming clean. And then he said this, "I am sorry for having created an immoral experiment that has turned against me." So there is the mark I promised you, an N on a Spanish keyboard, and 2 typists who punctuated a question differently and never once traded places. Only one of them has a name. Researchers who questioned Jordan Pena found he struggled to discuss the physics inside his own documents, and he never explained that second machine. He suffered a brain hemorrhage in 1988. He was still writing 5 years later. That 1993 confession is his own article,
But whether a man recovering from that could still turn out hundreds of pages of dense technical typescript is exactly what nobody has established. And the letters kept arriving anyway. He died in Madrid on the 9th of September, 2014, and Ummo documents were still being catalogued around that time. So if the man who confessed was only one hand on one keyboard, who was sitting at the other one? And did they ever stop typing?
That's the story. If you'd watch one more like this, hit subscribe and I'll have another ready soon.